As our guide made a stop under the big tree, all the village children whirled around the large Range Rover we had travelled in. The journey into the interior of the village had not been easy, as the roads were all in bad condition. It looked as if no vehicle had ever come this way before. "This is Kagera village," Omondi, our guide, said, turning towards the back of the car where my husband and I were seated. After more than 25 years, I had finally traced my way back to my home village. It was unbelievable to see that there had been no development at all here. It seemed to be exactly the same as when I had left it. The villagers lived in abject poverty. According to what I had heard, the fish trade, their main source of income, had dwindled due to the invasion of water hyacinth, which was choking the part of the lake closest to Kagera village. From inside the car, I earnestly looked around to see if anything looked familiar, but there was nothing. Finally, I stepped out of the car, followed by my husband. The villagers stared at us as if we were creatures from another planet. I was wearing a large, stylish hat to shield my eyes and the delicate skin of my face from the scorching sun. "Where is Akumu?" the old man who had come to meet us asked Omondi. "Here she is," Omondi answered in Luo, the local language of the people. The old man seemed thunderstruck. He stopped, his mouth agape, and stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then, as though finding his words, he spoke. "No," he said. "Akumu was not a white person. She was African." "I am Akumu," I answered in Luo. I had not forgotten my native language. By the time I left the village at 8 years of age, it was the only language I spoke. It was ingrained in every fibre of my being. The old man turned to me in disbelief. "No, it can't be," he said. I wondered, did he expect to see the little girl with albinism, the one with the blotches on her skin? I tried to figure out who he was, for he looked very familiar. I knew that the image I had created with my German husband beside me was that of a white woman. Unless someone looked closely, they wouldn't have been able to tell I wasn't entirely white. My skin had long been restored to a glowing, healthy condition, thanks to my wealthy foster parents. I was also wearing a beautiful blonde wig that complemented my complexion. The Luo I spoke seemed to finally convince the old man that I was truly Akumu. "I want to see my mother," I said to him in his language. That was all I wanted, to see my mother. Glancing at me nervously, he limped ahead, gesturing for me to follow. I turned to Fab, my husband, and to my amazement, he was already playing ball with some village boys. "Go on ahead. I'll join you shortly," he said. I smiled and turned back to the old man. That was just like Fab. He always managed to fit into new surroundings effortlessly. "Your mother still lives in the same house your family lived in. Your father is no more," the old man said to me. I was already aware that my father had passed away several years ago. Soon we were standing outside the little hut that had once housed me and my family. The old man moved remarkably fast for his age. I felt faint as I looked at the hut I had called home for the first 8 years of my life. My mother came to the door of the hut to meet us. We looked at each other for a long time. I wanted to run into her arms, but I hesitated. Memories of my childhood flooded back. I could clearly see myself as a young 8-year-old girl, sitting around the fire with my mother and siblings, right here in this hut, shivering and sniffling in my scanty clothing. It was the colder season of the year, deep in the lake region of Kenya. My family and I lived in a small village called Kagera, and like all the villagers, we lived in a grass-thatched mud hut that did little to ward off the biting cold air of July. We huddled together to stay warm. Although the fire had been burning earlier, it had died down to small embers. My mother preferred not to replenish it, as doing so would mean there would be no firewood left to cook breakfast the next morning. Breakfast usually consisted of a thick, white, tasteless porridge made from maize meal. It would have tasted better with sugar, but we were too poor to afford any. We ate it out of small white bowls that my father had bought from the nearby market, where he worked as a bicycle taxi operator, popularly known as a boda boda. I was the eldest child in the family, with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. We belonged to a dark-skinned tribe in the Lake Victoria region of Western Kenya. I would have given anything to have the dark skin that was the color of the rest of my family. But as fate would have it, my skin was as white as snow. I had albinism, and that made all the difference. Everyone called me Mzungu, meaning a European or white person. I had never actually seen a Mzungu, but I had a pretty good idea of what they looked like. ugly just like me. At the tender age of 8, I was alone in a world full of people. No one wanted to come close to me. Children my age refused to play with me, not because they truly hated me, but because, unknown to me, it was considered a curse in my community for a family to raise a child with albinism. All the children in the village were warned against playing with me, as it was believed I could transmit the curse to their families. In our culture, if a woman gave birth to a child with certain defects, the child was supposed to be thrown into the forest or even into the lake. Such children were to be done away with immediately after birth. My albinism was considered one of these defects, and although my mother clung to the fact that I had no physical impairments, none of the elders in my village accepted this. I was seen not only as a curse to my family, but to the entire village. As the eldest child in my home, I was expected to help my mother with household tasks. I was always busy taking care of my younger siblings for her. I loved my mother with all my heart because I knew she loved me. She always tried to make me feel just like all her other children. She never spoke about the discrimination I faced, but in her own way she knew how to shield me from anything that might hurt, or even potentially hurt, me. One day, one of my younger sisters came home and announced that I was not supposed to be part of her family. She had heard from her friend that I would bring bad luck not only to her, but to our entire family. Before I could comprehend the enormity of her statement, my mother sat us all down around the pot of vegetable soup she was stirring. She lifted out the ladle from the pot and asked all of us, "What is this?" "A ladle," we answered in unison. "And what is this?" she asked again, tapping at the pot lightly. "A pot," we answered. "Which one is better than the other?" she asked us, smiling. Some of us said the pot, while others said it was the ladle. "Whoever gets the answer correct will get a piece of the fish I fried for your father," she announced. Our father always got the best of the food. We now changed the answers. Those who had said pot now said ladle, and those that had said ladle now said pot. None of you is right. The answer is that none is better than the other, and do you know why? She asked. Yes, my younger sister answered. Okay, tell us why, and you get a piece of the fried fish, my mother said. Because we use the pot to cook and we use the ladle to stir, my sister answered. Clap your hands for her, my mother said. We all knew that, the rest of us murmured. Listen, children, my mother cut us short. None of us is better than the other. Every one of us is not only different but important. The pot and the ladle have to look different because they have different work to do, she said, looking at each one of us in turn. It is not Akumu alone that is different from us. We are all different from each other. Does your father look like me? Does he fetch water like me? Does he cook? We are all different because we have different work to do, she said again. We all meditated on this, but we did not quite comprehend the depth of our mother's wisdom because we were so young. In my childhood innocence, I knew that my mother was a strong woman. My father hardly ever talked to me, and instinctively I knew that he did not consider me a part of him. My mother ignored this, making it look like it did not matter. I think that was the reason I had the power to ignore him as well. I would catch him looking long and hard at me and I would feel hated and ugly. I chose to stay out of his way. For some time now, I had noticed that every evening my parents were meeting with a certain group of villagers in our home. Much as they always talked in low tones, I knew that the talks and discussions revolved around me. They would look at me strangely, and it always sent shivers down my spine. My mother looked very weary after these meetings. One day she called me and told me that I was going on a safari with her. She looked wearier than ever. I had never gone on a safari before, and I did not know what to make of it. She told me to put my belongings together in a paper bag, and the next day we set off. We boarded a bus to a destination I did not know. She later told me that we were going to visit my uncle in Nairobi, the big city which I later learnt was the capital of our country, Kenya. We travelled for what seemed an eternity. I slept and woke up several times. I looked out and saw interesting sights. I enjoyed the scenery but soon went back to sleep. The next time I woke up, we were already in the city. The tall buildings and many cars were almost scary. I had never seen this before. We alighted from the bus and stood for a while at the bus stop. My mum turned to me and told me to stand still and wait for her as she needed to make a phone call to my uncle. She dashed off and disappeared at a corner. I waited and waited, but she didn't come back. It was getting dark, and I was getting very scared. I wandered off in desperation, hoping to find her. Where was she? I retraced my steps to the bus stop. I waited and waited, but she never returned. She didn't come. What was I going to do? I decided to go and hide in the half-built structure I had spotted earlier. There was a foul smell inside, but I had nowhere else to go. As I stood shivering in the cold truth dawned on me. My mother had abandoned me. All strength left my legs, and I sat down and cried for hours. This could not be true. My mother loved me. The next morning I was woken up by a commotion outside. Clutching my small paper bag, I crept out of the building. Nobody seemed to notice me. I was very hungry, as we hadn't eaten anything on the bus, and I had had nothing since the thick white porridge the morning before. This was nothing like the village I knew. The city was loud, with cars everywhere and people rushing in all directions. Nobody seemed to care about my skin here. To them, I was just another obstacle in their path. I decided to start walking like everyone else. I walked and walked, but soon I began to feel weak from the lack of food. I needed to eat something. Suddenly, I smelled food. The sweet aroma was coming from a restaurant down the street. I decided to peek in. As I approached the entrance, someone inside noticed me and quickly came out, shooing me away. "Get out! You dirty urchin!" they shouted. I backed off, humiliated, and as I looked around, my eyes fell on a large trash can nearby. Peeking inside, I noticed some fish bones, and despite the smell, I decided to rummage for food. Hunger had stripped me of any care for cleanliness. After a moment of searching, I found a big piece of maize meal cake. It was familiar to me, a staple we often ate back home. Overjoyed, I took it and began eating. Before I could finish, I heard a voice behind me. "Who is this?" someone asked. Turning around, I saw several filthy children approaching the trash can. They pushed me aside and eagerly took over the bin. Among them was a girl about my age. She glanced at me and smiled. She became my friend and mentor for the next few weeks. Although the nights were very cold, the days were very hot and the sun had its toll on my delicate skin. My skin became blotched all over. Some parts looked yellow and others red. I had also developed some big, painful boils on my head. I must have been the ugliest sight on earth. I made a makeshift hat from a cardboard that I had picked from a dustbin to protect my skin from direct sunlight, but it did little to protect me from the harsh weather conditions. My new friend taught me how to survive. She seemed quite happy, but I hated it here. I missed my mother and siblings, and I often cried late into the night. Here we lived like animals, using everything we had to ward off predators of all kinds. Our favorite day was Friday. On this day, a humanitarian group came to feed us at lunchtime. They served a special rice dish made with spiced rice mixed with potatoes and large chunks of meat. I always looked forward to Fridays. Nothing tasted better. It was on one of these feeding days that two kindly women came to speak to the street children. We had just finished our precious meal. They spoke to us about the love of God, but I didn't understand much because my parents had never talked about God. The women then announced that any children who wanted to join a foster home were welcome to go with them. I thought everyone would rush at the opportunity, but I was shocked to see that no other street child was interested. This was my chance. I had been on the streets for a month and I hated it. I tried to convince my friend to come with me, but she wouldn't hear of it. "They are taking you to jail," she warned. Nothing was going to stop me. Shyly, I walked toward one of the women. She took my hand carefully, noticing it was filthy from the food I had just eaten. We never used spoons. "What is your name?" she asked. "Akumu," I replied shyly. The women did not bother with the others, and they took me in a car. I was taken to a home that housed about 25 other children. For the first time, I saw children with albinism. There were 3 of them. But they did not look like me. They were clean, and their skins were healthy. I bathed and was given clean clothes. In the evening, we were served a hot meal before going to bed. That night, I thanked God for my new home and vowed to be good and hard-working. We had plenty of chores to do, but I didn't mind. I was used to hard labor back in my village. Life at the home was becoming quite comfortable, and I was slowly succeeding in forgetting my family. Everything in the home was well organized, and we followed a strict daily schedule. Everything happened at a set time and in the same way every day. It so happened that my arrival coincided with the school holidays, but I was told I would join a school once the term started. I was thrilled. I had never set foot in a school before. This well-ordered routine, however, was disrupted after just 1 week, when I overheard one of the children excitedly talking about visitors coming to the home. The entire home buzzed with news that a German couple was expected the following day. However, they weren't just visiting, they were coming to adopt a child from the home. From what I heard, the couple was extremely wealthy. They had been screened by the government and deemed fit to adopt. This event didn't seem unusual to the other children. Apparently, it happened occasionally. It meant that the chosen child would have the chance to start an entirely new life with new parents. It was the most incredible opportunity a child at the home could ever dream of. The big day arrived. We all bathed and dressed in our best clothes. All the children looked wonderful except me. My skin was still in poor condition, and my hair had been shaved to expose the boils on my scalp for treatment. I knew I was an unpleasant sight to behold. The older children and I helped groom the younger ones, one of whom we believed would be chosen that day. This was always the pattern. No one ever seemed interested in adopting the older children. We combed the little one's hair and fixed new hairbands and ribbons. They looked absolutely irresistible. The German couple would certainly have a hard time choosing their new child. I had decided that I would hide myself once they arrived. I was not going to let them see a creature like me. Finally, they arrived. I saw them from a window, and I knew it was time to hide. They were ushered in by our matron. The director of the home was also present to hand over the chosen child. The couple was shown into the living room of our home. I could hear from my hiding place what was going on. The couple sat down and greeted all the children. They had brought many gifts for all the children, including delicacies like cakes and sweets. And then they asked, "Are these all the children in the home?" Everyone looked around, and soon they noticed my absence. "Where is Akumu?" the matron asked. I was soon dragged out of hiding to join the rest. I am glad this happened. This was no ordinary couple. The man looked around with eyes full of love, and so did his wife. I had never seen this before. He talked in a low tone, and his words were like a warm, loving caress on our cheeks. He approached one child at a time, looking deep in their eyes and talking to them with a voice filled with love. Did he want to adopt everyone? I was sure that if he could, he would. He wrapped his arms around each child and held them long. He had time for each child. Finally, he came to me, and I was so embarrassed. I was bald, I had boils and blotches. But he held me longer than all the other children, and to my disbelief he stood straight and spoke louder than he had spoken since he came and said, "This is the child for me." Everyone in the home erupted into a thunderous round of applause, their cheers filling the room with excitement and disbelief. Like me, they were stunned by the unexpected turn of events. The German couple had defied all expectations by choosing an 8-year-old girl with albinism, a child whose fragile health made her seem like an unlikely choice for adoption. My heart swelled with indescribable joy. I could hardly believe it. The other children rushed to my side, whirling around me in a chaotic dance of celebration. They hugged me tightly, their faces beaming with happiness as they shared in my moment of triumph. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, valued, and truly loved. Though the couple had chosen me, there was still an arduous process ahead. They needed to navigate a mountain of government paperwork before I could officially become theirs. Each day of waiting was a mix of hope and nervous anticipation. Finally, the day arrived when they returned to take me home. That day was a whirlwind of emotions, overwhelming joy mingled with bittersweet tears. The staff and children gathered around me, wishing me well with teary eyes and heartfelt embraces. It was a goodbye filled with love and the promise of a brighter future. As I walked away with my new family, I carried with me not only their dreams, but my own newfound hope for a life I had never dared to imagine. My new parents took me to Germany with them. Imagine that. A poor village child with albinism who had never stepped beyond the dusty paths of home, now soaring through the skies on a plane. It felt like stepping into a dream, one too strange and wonderful to believe. As the plane roared to life, my heart thudded louder than the engines. I gripped the armrests tightly, my fingers digging into the soft cushions. The ground outside seemed so far away, and the idea of flying was a miracle to me. When the plane began to rise, I let out a startled squeak, and my new mom laughed softly and patted my hand. "It's okay," she said, her voice soothing. As the plane soared higher, I couldn't help but giggle at the strange popping in my ears. "Am I going deaf?" I asked loudly in Luo, startling the elderly woman seated next to us. I had forgotten that no one spoke my language. My new dad patted my hand, a reassuring gesture. That day, I didn't just leave my village behind. I left my old fears too. The world had opened up to me, and it was big, beautiful, and full of wonders. Join me in part 2 of this story, where we uncover how Akumu embarked on a breathtaking journey into her new life in Germany, a country that welcomed her with open arms and offered her a fresh start filled with hope and acceptance. But amidst all the beauty and opportunity, why did Akumu feel an urgent pull to return to the very motherland that had once rejected her? Stay tuned to find out.